Welcome, everybody. This is Promethean PAC's fourth midterm boot camp. I'm Susan Kokinda. I've got Mike Stager here with me and also Tony Pappert. I think we can take a little bit of a victory lap because I think everybody knows that we have just been hammering away on the need to message out to the American people in clear, concise terms that this administration is beginning to deliver an economic revolution. And I'm sure many of you know that today the president was in Texas, and some of you might have watched it, but there you can see the White House advertisement. This is how President Trump advertised his visit to Texas, which is to list the absolutely enormous investments that are already going in. This is really stunning. You're talking about billions of dollars. Look at that NVIDIA investment, $500 billion. And also hardcore manufacturing, 1.25 billion for MP materials. Maybe Brian or somebody from our Texas crew can tell us what that is. I have a feeling that might have something to do with Project Vault. But this is exactly the kind of messaging that we have been encouraging to show people that this administration is delivering. When you put that in the context of what the president did on Tuesday night in the State of the Union, where the way I think about it is he pushed the reset button for a lot of people, where a lot of his own base had become disoriented, distracted, running down this rabbit hole and that rabbit hole, fixated on all the things that he hasn't done yet, allegedly. And what did he do in that State of the Union? He just made absolutely visceral how completely crazy the Democrats were, reminded people why Trump had been swept into office in the first place in 2024, despite everything they threw against him, because people understood that this Democratic Party was insane and evil. And he made that very, very visceral in the State of the Union message, as, you know, these morons, which is probably giving them too much credit, sat on their hands as American heroes and American accomplishment, and America itself was actually celebrated. In a very real sense, I think he did set the reset button and reminded people, okay, this is what we were thinking in November of 2024 when we voted for him. What we're going to do tonight is think about that question of the reset button in a little broader standpoint, because I think it's critical that we remind ourselves and especially our fellow Americans, and especially the fellow Americans out there who may be getting a little bit wobbly again at this point because they've been subjected to full spectrum psychological warfare. There's no question about that. But to show people just how devastating the economic policies of the globalists and their little democratic handmaidens have been, and what that has actually done to the standard of living and the lives of the average American. So we're going to discuss that a little bit tonight in the opening part of this presentation. And to just kind of give you a lay of the land of how we're going to unfold this tonight, we're going to have that brief presentation. Again, we always try and kind of drill down on a certain economic pedagogy so that we're thinking about what it is we really need to communicate to people. And then we're going to go through our action items because we have some exciting new initiatives, some of which I know you've been waiting for a long time, and I'm just going to tick them off one by one so you know what's coming. We're in the process of setting in place what is called a circle community. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with that, but it's a place where we will be able to have people from a single state in touch with each other directly. It's a place where we'll be able to make much more easily accessible the kind of resources that we're going to need for the midterms and a whole lot of other things. We hope to be able to start getting that in motion over the course of the next week. And I'll get back to what that actually means and what you need to do to participate in that. The second item that we'll be talking about a little bit later, and Mike talked about this on our boot camp 2 weeks ago, is our trip to Washington, D.C. And then third, I'll leave this as a surprise. Mike's going to present what I think is a really exciting initiative we have on the drawing boards at this point. We want to get your feedback And then after that, we're going to open it up to the fun part, which is the Q&A. So let's get going. In terms of what we want to talk about tonight, I think what the president did in the State of the Union message was extremely important, not just what he did to the Democrats. I mean, it was pure Trump and it was genius, and I think it's going to have a lasting effect. But he did something else in that State of the Union message, which I think was really important. He pulled people out of the immediate situation that they're in. He put people into the longer arc of history, because I think everybody on this call here is an organizer and tries to organize, and we all know the kind of things we run up against. And I think it's useful to think about the fact that when you're having problems organizing somebody, it's probably because they're stuck in the now. They're just reacting to something which has been thrown against them, or they're just reacting from a standpoint of impotence and anger, not from the standpoint of being an active participant in history. And I think one of the things that the president did in his State of the Union was to really put people on the stage of history with that wonderful arc of 100 years that he talked about. And obviously, the entire thing is framed from the standpoint that this is the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence from a very evil British Empire, which is still there and is still evil. And it's time we actually finish the job. I think it's important to think about, in a sense, the subjective side of things when you're organizing people, because we all have the experience. You can beat somebody about the head and shoulders with all the facts you want, and sometimes it just seems like you're hitting a brick wall because it's not an objective question. It's a subjective question. And I think what the president did on Tuesday was a master class in that. But I want to try and take it from a slightly different standpoint and talk about how we got to where we are. Because again, I think this idea of the reset, thinking back, how did we get to the situation that we're actually in at this point? And of necessity, I think that means that we have to go back to how did the economy get in the circumstance that it's in? Now, our friend Ben Deniston, our colleague at Promethean Action, does a weekly 15-minute YouTube show. So does Mike Stager. But the one that Ben did this week was really very powerful because he gives you the long sweep of how we got to where we are. I'm just going to show you about 3 minutes of this. I encourage you to watch the rest of it. Okay. If people don't know where to find Mike and Ben's shows, if you go to the Promethean Action website and click shows up in the upper right-hand corner, it will be one of the drop downs. And they do one each week. And they really are gems of short little pedagogicals, whether it's on economics, whether it's on culture, whether it's on where we stand in history.
For those crying about tariffs, insisting the most important thing is access to the cheapest goods possible, they should listen to President William McKinley from well over a century ago, when he said, "I do not prize the word cheap. It is not a badge of honor. It is a symbol of despair. Cheap prices make for cheap goods. Cheap goods make for cheap men. And cheap men make for a cheap country." That's the American system view. The goal is not the cheapest consumer goods. It's a productive, well-paid, and capable population. President McKinley was right, and the past 50 years of our slow descent into the madness of globalism and British free trade proves it. Let's go through the data. To truly grasp what's at stake with tariffs and what President Trump is battling against, you have to see what's happened to the productive backbone of the American economy. We're going to walk through several phases of U.S. economic history, and the picture isn't always pretty. The key question is this: how much of our economy is actually dedicated to real, physical, productive activity, the sectors that produce the goods society needs to survive? We're talking about agriculture, manufacturing, construction, mining, energy production, and freight transport. These are the sectors that create real physical value. For this assessment, start with the period from roughly 1880 to 1920. This is a healthy, productive baseline. The United States was a manufacturing superpower, the undisputed global heavyweight in steel production, and at one point was producing 1/3 of the entire world's industrial output. During this period, productive activity accounted for over half of total U.S. GDP, and nearly half of the non-farm labor force was engaged in productive work. This was an era of American system policies, internal improvements, and strong tariffs, typically in the range of 30 to 50%. Compare that to the period from the 1950s through the mid-1970s. Following World War II, the United States began participating in things like the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, showing early signs of abandoning the American system in favor of British free trade. General tariffs were in the range of 10%, but productive output still averaged just under half of GDP, and over 40% of the labor force remained engaged directly in physical productive activity. We were still a manufacturing powerhouse, but the cracks were forming. Then comes the early 1970s into the early 1990s. This is where the real damage begins. Starting with the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971, we entered a period of deliberate deindustrialization. And the Trump administration knows this was not an accident. As Secretary of State Marco Rubio said recently,
deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence.
make sure that sinks in. Deindustrialization was not a natural evolutionary step for the economy. It was a conscious policy decision. During this period, both the productive contributions to GDP and the productive share of the labor force collapsed to roughly a third. Then in the 1990s, we entered the full globalist era. With the North American Free Trade Agreement and the World Trade Organization, the bottom fell out. For this phase, merely a quarter of U.S. GDP is tied to physically productive activity, and only a fifth of the labor force is engaged in productive work. As we'll see shortly, this represents a collapse of our ability to create true physical value, as opposed to monetary illusions. Again, President McKinley was right. With free trade and globalist policies designed to chase the cheapest goods possible, we became a cheaper, weaker, and more vulnerable nation. Which brings us back to tariffs. When done right, tariffs are a key tool for a functioning economy because they protect the source of real physical value. Forget monetarism. Economic growth is fundamentally a physical process. It's about changing our relation to the natural world in a way that no animal species can.
We'll just take a minute and look at that final chart, which shows the dramatic shift in our productive capacity. This is from what Ben just presented, but this shows the devolution of our identity as a producing nation from its peak under the American system policies between 1880 and 1920 to where we are today, where a fraction of our activity is engaged in actually producing things and changing nature. And again, this is the percentage of our labor force actually engaged in productive activity. And as Ben pointed out, it's less than 20% today of our labor force is engaged in actual productive activity. Remember, these are the jobs where one income can raise a family. These are the jobs which give people the kind of stability to have a healthy culture, a healthy family, and a healthy future. And this is what the president is bringing back. Now, this is a little graph that I made for the area that I live in because someone whom I'm very close to, my husband, is running for state representative in this area. It's called Downriver Detroit. It's the blue-collar working class suburbs that are just south of Detroit, i.e. down the river. This was the beating heart of the workforce for especially Ford Motor Company, since we're downriver, but the auto industry defined this area. I developed this because my husband is running for state representative, and it's something that we're going to be using to show people in the district in a very visceral way what the controlled disintegration, the deliberate controlled disintegration of the economy under the globalists and under the Democrats is really all about. I picked 3 of the cities in this district because those are the 3 that are entirely in the district. There's a couple of precincts from another one. But the top line, the blue line, Allen Park, was the most prosperous in this area. It happens to be where I grew up. What you're looking at in this chart is what has happened to median household income between 1990 and today, measured in 1990 dollars. So in other words, we're factoring in inflation. So if you look at that top blue line with Allen Park, the median household income in 1990, before NAFTA, before all of this stuff kicked in, was over $70,000. And then NAFTA kicked in, which you can see in the period between 1990 and 2000. And then, of course, you end up with the 2008 blowout, which exacerbates everything. And it just catapults down so that whatever people are nominally making today, it's the equivalent of less than $50,000 when these households were making $70,000 35 years ago. The other two communities in this area were much poorer. Melvindale, which you see on the bottom, I mean, it's been plunged into poverty by this. Now, this chart was very easy to generate using AI, whichever your favorite one is. And I think one of the things that will assist people in doing is if you're running for office or you just want to go out there and make conscious to people what has actually happened to their lives over this 30 years. And again, this gets back to Donald Trump's resetting. We have to keep reminding people what it was they rejected when they overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. They rejected this destruction of their lives. They rejected, whether they knew it or not, the controlled disintegration of the economy. So again, this is something we can work with other people in terms of generating something similar for their areas, because I think it's really important, again, to pull people out of the now and put them in the sweep of the dynamic of what has actually affected their lives. This is why we produced our newest half-page flyer, President Trump's Republican New Deal. And you've all heard me quote this before, but I can never help myself. The Scott Bessent quote there in the middle, where he makes clear that the Democratic strategy was to compensate the losers. They made you losers by the destruction of the productive workforce in the United States. And then they wanted to throw a little bit of money at you to keep you pacified. And what this administration is doing is making people winners again by actually changing the system. And of course, I'm sure many of you have looked at this flyer, and I know many of you have already gotten the flyer and have used it. This is just a preliminary snapshot of what the president is doing. And again, they're picking up on our methodology and our messaging because that was the message they delivered to Texas voters. So that's pretty much what I wanted to present from the standpoint of a way of thinking about what it is we're trying to communicate to people when we're trying to blast them out of the now and the psychological warfare that they're in. So we can discuss this more when we get to the question and answer period. But I now want to just get to the three areas of action that we're going to be engaged in. Here are two of our initiatives. As I mentioned at the outset, we're setting up this community platform called Circle. We're new to it. We're just going to be feeling our way around it. By the way, if there's people here who are familiar with it and want to reach out to us and let us know, you might be able to speed our learning process. But what we will be able to do with this is we will be able to set up a chat room for other people in your state so that you can be in touch with them in real time. What Circle also gives you the ability to do is to have resource pages, class pages, and other pages. So what you're seeing there is just a simple sign-up form that we've created if you want to be part of this Circle platform and get in touch with other people in your state. Just copy that URL there and fill it out, and we'll be in touch with you. If you don't want to copy the stuff that's on the screen here, I will get an email out tomorrow with all of this information in it for everybody who's participating. But if you want to get moving right away, you can do that. I think this is going to give us an enormous capability to really set up organization. And let me also say this, we may not be able to handle every state all at once. We are few, you are many. But I'm sure as, people step forward to take leadership in various areas, we will be able to expand the reach. Probably for starters, we're going to focus on the key battleground states and the states where we're in. So if you sign up and don't hear from us immediately because maybe you're the only person in Vermont who signed up, just be a little bit patient until we build up a little more head of steam as far as that goes. So that's initiative number one. Initiative number two, Mike talked about 2 weeks ago. We have a growing delegation going to Washington, D.C., where this will be our third Promethean Action visit to Capitol Hill, where we set up scores and scores and scores of meetings with congressional staffers and in some cases with congressmen. And especially since we have so much of a lead time this time, and we have so many more people who are engaged with us, I'm confident that we can get more meetings with the congressmen and perhaps even some of the senators themselves. As our delegation has said in the past, half of the fun is meeting the congressmen in the elevators and the cafeteria and so on. So whether we get a meeting or not, this has an enormous, enormous impact. And then on the bottom of this page, you see we have a new email. I mean, we're getting bombarded with emails, and half of them are, I can't find my subscription, or how do I change my email? So we've set up now a dedicated new email for organizers. So if you want to be directly in touch with us, say you need that half-page flyer real fast because you've got a big event coming up, use that organize@prometheanaction.com. We'll be able to see those emails a lot faster because they'll be carved out from the otherwise overwhelming amount of communications that we're actually getting. I will send all of this out in an email tomorrow. So those are two of our immediate initiatives. Mike, you're up.
Okay, welcome. Glad everyone's on. These great discussions are great. Man, we're at almost 200 tonight. These things are growing fast. That's awesome. So part of this is trying to think through how we take this kind of potential that we have, the revival of American system, what Trump is doing, and really kind of demonstrate to a lot of the political networks out there that are excited about what Trump's doing. And I'm talking highly professional, well-named groups. I'm not going to name them, but that are committed to the fight, but they don't necessarily get into the thick of it. They kind of want to stay on the surface. They kind of want to play nice. And I don't mean play dirty, play nice. I mean, they just don't want to get into actually really challenging the population on what this historical moment means in the most intense way. And I think that's why you're on this call. I think that's why you like Promethean Action and what we're doing. So we thought about, can we deploy into a specific district with a quality of deployment that I was involved in almost 20 years ago in 2006. There was a special election runoff at the time. About 5 or 6 of us deployed, and we just blew up the entire district. 6 of us just deployed very effectively to shake it up and really blow up the opposition. So can we do that again today? Around what Trump's doing, around this fight with the globalists, around this fight with NAFTA and free trade. We looked at some districts nationally. There's a bunch of contentious ones, but we've got one right here in our backyard, near where Susan and I and Tony are in the Detroit area. It's in Macomb. It's the 10th congressional district in Michigan. This is a district that Obama won twice, that Reagan made famous with the Reagan Democrats in 1980, 84, that Obama won twice, Trump won twice, and Biden won once. So it really does flip. And it's one of the 2 areas. Susan pointed to downriver, which went big for Trump. I was in Melvindale the night of the election. I saw 4 Arab kids in a car coming to vote for Trump. I said, at that point, I knew we won this. That was the kind of turnout you just wouldn't have been able to expect. But Macomb is also a really big industrial area. It's the big Warren tank plant that's also now part of the General Motors complex. There's a bunch of industry, a bunch of machine tools. So it's a productive area, and it really is one of these things that's going to be on the top 10 of almost any organization's national list of critical races you have to win, because it's a weather vane. It tells you where the population's going. Has Trump continued to reach these blue-collar voters? So here's the idea. Can we pull together approximately 5 young people to deploy for 3 months, kind of like a Promethean internship? So there'll be stipends. We'll get housing. The months don't correspond perfectly to the summer months. That's a bit of the catch. Instead of June through August or something, it fits with a lot of colleges or whatever. We're talking August, September, and October. That's the general election months in Michigan. Our primary is so late, it's early August. So it's 3 months from the primary to the general. So that's what we're thinking. And our first sense was, well, let's put this out to our network of devoted activists and the boot camp. And so if you guys know people, it doesn't have to be kids in college. It could be young people not sure what they want to do, wanting to figure out if they want to get into politics, love our ideas, want to engage in ideas. There are going to be tons of young people deployed into this district. I know it because I've been organizing on some of the campuses around here. I know a lot of the young people in the Republican Party circles. The governor's campaign, the campaign for Congress is going to be involved. There's going to be a lot of activity. So it's going to be a fun, engaging period for any young person that comes in. We'll be doing classes for them, discussions. It'll be a chance for them to get to know the ideas of the American system, the ideas behind our country and the principles of our civilization, but to also deploy almost nonstop, if they're serious, nonstop into a political battle that can help shape the country and shape the midterms. And the idea is if we can effectively do it in the 10th, in 26, we can do this in 10 districts in 28. We can start to take these Promethean ideas and the kinds of action that these ideas compel really to the streets of the American people and recruit this younger generation, the way Charlie Kirk was doing it, with that kind of rich dialogue and that sense of political fight. Bring that really to bear the way we know we can. So that's the pitch. That's the basic idea. I guess we haven't figured out this part of it yet, but if you guys have any thoughts or ideas, if you know young people, we thought this would be the best place to start to see if we can find some young people that we want to engage. So certainly you could respond to that email. I'll definitely be playing point on this with Susan. We want to talk to the students or young people, interview them, get a sense of them, but we're definitely open to any possibilities. So Susan, maybe that is enough, but I'll throw it
Yeah,
back to you.
that's great. I'll just add two other things to it. As Mike has pointed out, because this is one of the top districts in the country, it's currently held by a Republican, John James, who, despite President Trump's pleading, left the seat to go run for governor. No one's very happy about that. It's thrown this really important seat into the open. So all the national groups are going to be sending teams in. Turning Point's going to be in here. All sorts of groups are going to be in the 10th CD with their people, but none of them will do what we do. I mean, they'll do a lot of the important door knocking and mechanics and so on. We're going to come in with the big ideas. And whoever the Democratic nominee is, we are going to eviscerate them. We don't know who the Republican will be. There's a couple of decent people running, and there's some other people who have no business running. I'm sure one of the two decent people is going to end up being the nominee, but we're going to be deploying to keep Trump's policies at the top of the ticket. And as I say, to completely eliminate politically from the face of the earth, whomever the Democrat is, and make it a real teaching moment for the whole nation, and including the Trump team itself in terms of this kind of organizing. So I think that's part of the special appeal for this particular area. Now, this is all in the drawing board, and once we pull the trigger on this, we are going to need the financial backing to do it, because this is not going to be done by collecting pennies on a street corner. So once we get to that point, when we say this is a go, we've got the people who are ready to do it, we're ready to go, we're going to need people to back us up and help us. I don't think we're going to have a problem, because this is a really exciting perspective. I'm ready to open it up for questions.
Yes, I'm trying to be politically active here in Wake County, North Carolina. And through my friends at Promethean, I was able to contact the GOP precinct here in Wake County that I belong to, and was invited to come to their regional meeting for our region, and which is in the southern part of Wake County. They also, of course, invited us to come to the annual convention that's being held March 24th for Wake County GOP. So last night at the precinct meeting, which is my first experience with a precinct meeting, I took Promethean flyers. And as I came in the door, they were very welcoming and they were very open to having us join them. They're very MAGA, our particular precinct region. And in addition to that, I showed them the flyers and started to hand them out. And people walked away with them and then came back. And the chair of Wake County GOP came up to me and said, "Can we put flyers here on a table at the entry area?" And I said, "Sure." And I handed her flyers because I had just received a big batch from Promethean, and they're wonderful flyers. What everyone seemed to feel was that the flyer presented what's going on in a simple format that they could understand and hand to other people. And it also reinforced their feelings about this particular midterm, which energized everybody. And so that was what was exciting. It was a very energetic, positive meeting. And we walked away sort of just flying on energy and wings. And during the process, they voted on who was going to be the different precinct chairs and who were going to be the block captains for going house to house and doing the roles. And my husband and I, we happened to be in a precinct here in North Carolina that only had 2 people that were at this precinct meeting, myself and my husband. And so we are now the block captains. So we're going to be doing all of that work, and it's very preliminary. But this group is very enthusiastic. In our precinct in the southern tip of Wake County, my understanding is that the voter rolls are basically 2 Republicans to every 1 Democrat. And so we should be able to easily win for our representatives here in our area. But once again, we're fighting against Wake County, which is a very heavily blue area in the northern part of the state, in Raleigh as well as in the Triangle.
That's great. I think that's going to really inspire a lot of people. Yesterday on our live Q&A on YouTube, somebody put in the comments there, "I've got the flyers, but I don't know what to do with them. I've never done this before." And I encouraged them to get on the call tonight to hear reports like this. But sort of the lowest hanging fruit in terms of the flyers is to do exactly what you did. Go to your local Republican meeting. And of course, this is the period of time when a lot of this is going on. New delegates are being elected, state conventions are taking place. So there's going to be county meetings and congressional district meetings and state meetings. These are all marvelous places because the first thing we have to do is organize the organizers, and then go out even further. So I was really thrilled to see your report because it's exactly the right kind of initiative, and the response you got is something that I'm sure everybody here is happy to hear. In fact, if Mike puts his hand up, he'll probably give a similar report from Michigan soon. And
I just want to add one more thing. At the end of the meeting, there was still some flyers on the table because there was 30 people at our precinct, regional precinct meeting. And so there were some flyers left because I had a stack there. And the chair, she wanted to take the rest of them back to headquarters. So I thought, yeah, so we will be broadcasting the message. It's going to get out. And Wake County is going to vote the right way. We're going to get those votes out, get the numbers up. So thank you.
Thank you. And look, North Carolina is one of the states like Texas, which is actually cashing in. So I'm sure whenever the president comes to North Carolina, and the fact that he's backing Whatley means he'll probably be there soon. Well, actually, he was already at Fort Bragg. He'll probably put out something similar for North Carolina. This is all the investment that we brought into the state. And then maybe we need to get a little more specific. Let's say you're in an area which generally votes blue, but there's 5,000 decent paying jobs coming in. Well, then we should go out and tell those formerly blue voters, this is what this economic policy is bringing to you. So I think that's terrific. I wanted to mention one thing. People haven't noticed when you go to the order page for the flyers, if an organization would like to put the flyer out in its own name, All they need to do is contact me. The information is on the order page. And I'll get them the template. They get me the appropriate change authorized and paid for. And they just have to give us a nominal contribution, and then they can go print them in their own name if they want to. So we're happy to broadcast Promethean PAC all over the country. But again, if some organization wants to do it in their own name, we're willing to work with them and accommodate that. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll let the chair know.
Great, thanks. I will get out an email tomorrow, which has those forms for signing up for the circle, and I'll share the slideshow with people, although we will try and get that on the website as soon as possible. This has been a really terrific discussion. We're making an impact, and I think we will ultimately make the impact that makes the difference. So thank you all for being here, and we will see you in 2 weeks.